This is Current Reflections, a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education.
For decades, tribal colleges and universities have offered teacher education programs to prepare K-12 instructors. But what exactly distinguishes teacher education preparation at TCUs from mainstream institutions? For this installment of Current Reflections, we are joined by Dr. Linda Sue Warner, a member of the Comanche Nation and a leading voice in American Indian education for over 5 decades. She began her career teaching elementary school and then high school before earning her PhD in administration at the University of Oklahoma and transitioning to higher education. Over the years, she has held several positions at both mainstream institutions and tribal colleges, including as president of Haskell Indian Nations University and San Carlos Apache College. Dr. Warner is also the author of numerous essays and articles and the editor of the landmark book, Tradition and Culture in the Millennium, Tribal Colleges and Universities. Dr. Warner, we're honored to have you back here on Current Reflections to share your insights and perspectives on teacher education.
Thank you for inviting me, Bradley. I appreciate the opportunity to shoot off my mouth any chance I get. So let's see what the afternoon brings.
Okay, well, the last time we interviewed you was in 2022, and the theme was shared governance. And a lot has changed since then. How have you been, and how are things at San Carlos Apache College?
Well, I've been here at San Carlos for a year and a half. And, I don't know that many people know this, but we're still an emerging tribal college. We operate under the umbrella of TOCC down in South Arizona. And so we're actually spending a lot of time getting our ducks in a row so that we can be accredited full-time by one of the regional accrediting associations. So we have that going on, which occupies, as you can imagine, a lot of our time. And then at the same time, we're pursuing accreditation by the World Indigenous Higher Ed Consortium. And several, I think maybe 4 or 5 of the other tribal colleges are accredited by WNHEC as well. So we're anxious to do that. I tell people I would really love to be accredited by WNHEC before I'm accredited by a regional accrediting agency, because I'd like to be the first tribal college that is actually accredited by an indigenous organization before the colonized organization. I know it's one of the things that very early on the founders of the tribal college movement talked about a lot. And in fact, Lionel was very interested, involved, and worked with the founding of WNHEC. So there's a little bit of history along that line. I think that would be cool. I'm not sure the timelines will work out that way, but we certainly want to be accredited by both organizations.
Yeah, I believe WNHEC is having their meeting, or had it recently, in New Zealand. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, they have their meeting, I believe, the week of Thanksgiving, and I sent people to Hawaii last year to get people on campus familiar with WNHEC. Of course, when I was president of Haskell, we were accredited by WNHEC, and I'd served on a WNHEC accrediting team in Canada. But the one in New Zealand, I've sent people to the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education. That's in New Zealand right now. I have 3 people over there for that. But the WNHEC conference is you're actually able to zoom in on that. So that's how we're going to participate this year, through the Zoom link.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's such a incredibly long flight. So I don't blame you for Well, let's jump in with the big overarching question. How is teacher education different at tribal colleges and universities?
Well, I can, as I mentioned, San Carlos Apache College doesn't have a standalone teacher education program. Uh, the one I would be probably most familiar with would be the one that we had at Haskell. I think probably what you want me to say is the big difference is we value culture, tribal cultures and languages, and are probably more apt to use place-based education. Um, Whether I could attest to that in the tribal colleges across the country, I don't have the information to know that. My best guess is that they rely heavily on local cultural elders to advise in their on their curriculum. So it's a matter of balancing that kind of input with accrediting standards that you need for the professional organizations such as NCATE.
Okay. Um, so 10 years ago, TCJ did a special issue. It was called The Trials of Teacher Education. And we focused largely in that issue on the challenges and difficulties that teacher ed programs at TCU specifically were facing. And among those challenges, probably the biggest were accreditation and licensure. Do you see those as still the greatest challenges or difficulties? In your mind, what are the greatest trials of teacher education today?
Well, I actually do think that getting accredited and the licensure piece are both huge issues for tribal colleges. And one of the reasons is the graduates of the teacher ed programs, at least in the couple that I'm familiar with, really, those graduates have really serious issues passing the licensure written test. And so you could be a graduate of a teacher ed program and never end up with a license and never teach. And I think that's something that we don't look at really that closely across the TCUs. Probably we should look at it a little bit more. I think one of the contributing issues here is um, not only this business of taking a standardized test, but for example, because I'm an English teacher, I can hear when we're talking if you make a grammatical mistake, and I can hear myself when I make one. It's it's just how I was trained. But if you're trained by someone, if your teacher ed instructor is a second language instructor and doesn't really understand the grammatical nuances of English, for example, then that's how you learn. Because one of the things that we absolutely know about teacher ed is that you teach how you were taught. If you were taught math with an instructor who had his back to the students and was just writing across the blackboard, when you get ready to teach math, that's how you're going to teach. Unless there's some serious intervention in a teacher ed program that says, you know what, that method doesn't work for all students. I think the test case for us, at least for me, was at Indian Community School. When I first went to Indian Community School, we had really low attendance rates and we had really low performance rates on the standardized test. And so I hired a lady to be the principal of that institution, and she's actually getting an award this week from Phoenix Indian Center as a lifelong contributor to education. And she helped me transform that school from one that, by incorporating culture, to one where students wanted to come to school. So, you can't teach a kid if they won't come to school. And if you want them to come to school, you have to know how to teach to them. So basically, we did a lot of place-based education. We did a lot of traditional value-based education. And we got both of those markers, the attendance and the achievement, to dramatically change with that. It was a real struggle because there are multiple tribes in those inner city schools. And if you're on a reservation where there's just one tribe and one set of culture, I think it might be somewhat easier, but it's still going to be difficult because you're still trying to balance national standards and the kinds of tests that your students are going to be taking against what what you're teaching in the classroom. And you don't want to just teach to the test. Well, when you back it up one more level then and say, well, how are teacher ed students dealing with this? They're listening to their methods teachers, right? The ones at the tribal college, the instructors at the tribal college. If those people have poor grammar or don't understand it, then how are they teaching the next generation of instructors? It's still going to be broken English, if you will, and there's still going to be issues. So I think that when their students then go to try to take a standardized test, and we all know there are ways you can teach people to take a test. If you're not training them in some of those things, then you've spent a lot of time, but you're not going to get the payback that you want. It's in, like I was talking to a colleague who used to work at a tribal college, and he was telling me that, they would, maybe graduate 10 students in their class, but only 2 or 3 could pass the licensure test. So I'm like, well, what are the other students doing? Well, they're being teacher aides. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a teacher aide, but if you're qualified to be a teacher, you should be a teacher. I mean, that's what you want to do. So I don't know if I really answered the question. I do think this business of getting the license and understanding the state test and getting past that should be a significant part of those training exercises. I also think that, like when I was at Haskell, we were NCATE accredited, primarily because KU was NCATE accredited. And we're sitting right across the street from them, and some of our students would be going up there. So we wanted to make sure that as a professional field, that we had students who were meeting those accreditation standards. There are a couple of other ones now. I think the Association of Advancing Quality and Education Preparation, and I don't know, there's a couple of others. But it goes back to my telling you earlier that early on when Lionel was thinking about accrediting an institution, that it may be that tribal colleges could think about setting up a teacher ed professional accrediting association, where across the tribal colleges, those people who are working in the teacher ed field share some experiences and share some professional good practices, best practices across campuses so that they actually can, move the bar for everyone. I think I'll stop there because sounds like I'm on a soapbox of some sort.
Well, we're actually going to be doing next year, next volume, we're going to be, our advisory board voted, we're going to do an issue specifically on accreditation. So, hopefully we can talk when that issue, we begin work on that issue. Linda Sue Warner is the president of San Carlos Apache College. We'll be back with current reflections in just a moment.
Yate, this is Marvin Tom, the advertising coordinator for the Tribal College Journal. Since 1989, TCJ has earned a loyal following of readers who are passionate about American Indian education. Our dynamic media outlet reaches a diverse, wide-ranging market, including students, educators, and lawmakers. And here's the best part, TCJ offers a variety of reasonable price advertising options that can be placed in our magazine, on our website, or right here in our Current Reflection podcast. For more information, contact me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@tribalcollegejournal.org. Yeah.
You're listening to Current Reflections, and I'm speaking with Linda Sue Warner on teacher education. There's a growing number of online programs, including teacher ed programs. How do we ensure that such distance programs maintain their cultural grounding? Is that even possible with virtual learning?
Well, you remember I said earlier that teachers teach the way they were taught. I mean, like, I came through teacher education when basically in the classes that I attended in high school and in college, where there was a lot of rote memorization. So when I started teaching, first off, my first job was teaching second grade, only because the school district had no second grade teacher and they had 40 students in a combined 1 and 2, and they needed somebody, a warm body to take care of these 19 kids. I'm pretty sure those 19 kids hate me because I didn't know anything about how to teach a second grader at all. And my qualification, according to the superintendent, was, well, you're a parent, aren't you? I'm like, okay. But having said that, when I started teaching high school English, which was what I was trained to do, we did a lot of stuff. Like, I made 5 years of kids memorize Shakespeare's funeral, Mark Antony's funeral speech. Okay.
Wow.
Now, that's just crazy nuts on one level. On the other hand, training your mind to memorize something is not a bad thing. So, I kind of, and actually, I'm still good friends with a lot of those kids. So apparently, it didn't turn them off that much. But that's how I was taught to teach. That you read these classical things, you analyzed them a certain way, and then you got kids to memorize a variety of things. But the longer I was in teacher ed, not in teacher ed, but the longer I was in the teaching profession, the clearer it became to me that not every kid learns that way. And back to my experience at ICS, when we would have a classroom there, we might have different stations where there was, like a tactile station, an auditory station, a visual station, so that, and this was not my idea, it was my principal's idea, to engage students in a variety of ways. Now, with the advent of the internet and all this online, this, that, and the other, the first thing that occurred to me when I thought about this question was that the teaching methods for online teaching have to be different. We can't just use the same methods that we're using for person face-to-face teaching. We have to think about the fact that, students' engagement time is way less with the students that we have now than it was, as well as the student teachers that we have. They're going to be engaging with kids who have the attention span of a gnat, right? So we have to think about ways to teach them how to keep those kids engaged. And I don't think that there's a lot of that going on yet. I think that, I believe in all kinds of possibilities. So I believe that it's possible to deliver a distance ed program. But I think you really have to engage people in activities that are going to ground them to the community that they're working in and with, so that it's all going to make sense to them when they turn around and try to teach young people. In other words, I don't really have the answer to this, but I certainly identify that it's a problem as well.
There are university professors in teacher education departments who have never taught or have very little experience at the primary or secondary level. How did teaching elementary and high school influence your view of teacher preparation as well as your philosophy as an administrator?
Well, as I mentioned, I have accidental experience as an elementary teacher. Um, when I when I worked at the Urban Indian School, I did have experience as an elementary administrator, and of course, a couple of different ways, teacher and administrator at high schools or at secondary level. I think that one of the interesting things that I learned in Wisconsin, and that I'd like to share with you about this, is we um, we we had more than one tribal community in our school, and we certainly had more than one, or more than that in terms of ethnic identity. So we were looking for a common set of values. I think this is one of the things that we do here in San Carlos. When I came here, I looked at the mission statement of the college, and I looked at what cultural values that mission statement represents. But in that urban environment, one of the communities represented was the Oneida tribe. And as you know, they're from the Six Nations Confederacy. And so we're messing around, and I found an excerpt from the Great Law. And then I reached out to a Mohawk advisor, colleague, Gerald Alfred, and I said, I found this excerpt and I want to change it and use it at my school. And he said, yeah, cool, that's cool. So we did. And so we had these little posters, if you will, a lot of our promotional materials built around this idea of the Great Law, which I'm going to kind of try to paraphrase here. But what the statement was essentially was, as teachers, we are mentors of our students for all time. We labor to stand against anger, sadness, criticism, and defeat. Our hearts shall be full of peace and our minds filled with an urgency for the welfare of our students. With endless patience, we embrace our duty. Our firmness shall be tempered with tenderness. Our words and actions shall be marked by calm deliberation. So we had these printed on cards. We put them in all the schools. We basically told the staff, you need to think about this. When we got ready to hire a new employee, we'd go through the whole interview process, and then we'd give them one of these cards, and I would say, you need to put this under your pillow and think about it tonight when you fall asleep, because if this is not who you are, you do not belong at this institution, because this is who we are. So the idea that incorporating multiple cultural values and staying true to that one mission, I think that's what I learned from teaching across those years that influenced being an administrator, and certainly influences me today as I help San Carlos Apache College move toward being an accredited standalone institution.
Hmm. Well, that's wonderful. I'm going to email you for that saying there. Finally, as a longtime leader in American Indian higher education, we always end with a question like this, by the way. So as a longtime leader in American Indian higher education, What advice and wisdom can you offer emerging TCU leaders on enhancing or improving teacher education at their tribal colleges?
I think the thing that probably makes the most sense to me is that it's important that you set expectations of competence. I don't think that's necessarily just in teacher education, but where more important would it be? Because you're training a group of people who are going to train the next generation. And by competence, I mean not only in teaching methods, but also in the content area that they're going to teach in. I think now, one of the lessons that I learned at Haskell was some people believe that you can replace competence by yelling loudly. You know, if you have an opinion and you want to yell loudly or put it on a poster and parade it around, that somehow that replaces competence. I don't think that it's ever going to. I think if tribal nations are going to sustain themselves and move forward, that we have to train competent people to be our next leaders.
Current Reflections is a production of Tribal College, Journal of American Indian Higher Education. Thank you for listening.
Now da touching in slow and shame bashes chain, but Andy dash che taban dash nulle. I am Marvin Tom, the subscription manager for the Tribal College Journal. Today, tribal colleges and universities are uplifting Native communities, and Tribal College Journal is their voice. So don't hesitate, subscribe to the Tribal College Journal today and help support American Indian higher education. For just $29, you will receive our quarterly publication plus the annual edition of TCJ Student, which features creative writing and art. It is as easy as a quick phone call or email. You can reach me at 970-764-4238 or at marvin@tribalcollegejournal.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Ahiya.